Hello and welcome to the latest webinar from Wendell Intelligence Insights. Today, Diana's talking all things Easter. So, Diane, what happened Easter 2024?
Well, we were anticipating a fairly cautious Easter given the current economic climate, but it actually turned out to be much more positive than we envisaged, with both footfall and sales up by 7% year on year over the Easter weekend, which is really strong performance. And footfall is footfall by Sensormatic, which is footfall into stores, and sales are measured by Beauclair, which is sales from debit card transactions, UK-based accounts. So it was a really positive Easter, actually, much more positive than we thought.
And what were the peak trading days?
Well, the peak trading days were very much in line with what we've seen in previous years. The strongest days were Good Friday and Easter Saturday, which is where traditionally people go out and shop and then use Sunday and Easter Monday to either entertain or have family lunches. So over these 2 days, we saw footfall into store rise by an average of about 9.9% from last Easter, but just 1.8% on Easter Monday, and spending on Good Friday and Easter Saturday rose by a similar amount, by about 8% year on year, versus 5% on Easter Monday. So clearly it's front loaded, it always has been, and it continues to be that way.
And what do you think drove the success year on year?
Well, it's really interesting because when you look at spend, you've got 3 key metrics. You've got an increase or decrease in the number of customers. You've got the change in the number of transactions those customers make, and also the value of those transactions. And we saw rises in each of these 3 metrics. So Beauclair identified that there was a 2% increase in how many customers were buying products, a 4% increase in the number of transactions those customers made. So more people were buying multiple transactions, and the transaction value rose by 3%. So really strong metrics in spending.
And what about retail spend?
Well, there's 5 retail categories that account for around 80% of our spending across UK towns and cities: fashion, food and drink, which is hospitality, general retail, grocery, and health and beauty. And those 5 categories recorded rises in sales from Easter 2023. And the biggest rises were in health and beauty, which is following the recent trend of self-care, which rose by 20% year on year, and general retail, which rose by 18%. And actually, really interestingly, fashion sales, although that's been having a pretty torrid time over the last few months, fashion sales was 6% higher over this Easter than they were over the previous Easter last year. And actually, Easter was a week earlier this year. So that's really encouraging.
Great. And what about household? What was household sector spend like?
Yeah, that was really different, actually. I mean, we know that the household sector has been having a really tough trading time over the last year or so, given the uplifts that we saw in household spending through the pandemic and just after. And normally it's a strong category of spending over Easter as people replenish and refresh their housing, do stuff in the garden. So that counts within the household sector. But it was really challenging, and it's had a pretty torrid time. We spent 20% below Easter last year. So people are clearly pulling back on spend on large ticket items, and we're seeing that in spending on the sector as a whole.
And is there anything else that you think the kind of Easter trading performance tells us about what the next few months or the rest of the year could look like?
Well, it's interesting because footfall in stores on retail parks was actually up over Easter. It was actually nearly 11% up. So people were going into stores on retail parks. But I think what we're seeing is the people going into stores, and they're food stores. So people were buying food. And I think what we're seeing is that people are spending a lot on self-care, as we've seen. So health and beauty is strong still, and that will continue. Food, eating, dining in will continue over the next few months. But in general terms, what we're probably likely to see is a bigger trend and a bigger shift towards those peak trading times. And that was very clear in March. It was a bit of a case of robbing Peter to pay Paul. Over March as a whole, footfall declined annually by 1.3%. So although it rose over Easter, it declined across the month. And spending rose only very marginally in March by 0.2%, but rose strongly over Easter. So we can see that people were really pulling back on spend prior to Easter in those weeks leading up to the bank holiday, and then reserving their budgets for the bank holiday. And we're likely to see that more and more as we go through the year. So I wouldn't be surprised if footfall and sales go into another lull over the summer, possibly peaking again as it normally does in the summer holidays in August, but then falling right back until we hit Christmas trading again.
Hold off, Di. Let's not talk about Christmas just yet. But thank you so much for tuning in, everyone, and see you next time.